Order. So welcome everyone on this fine Monday afternoon. What's that? You should change your name. Yeah. So welcome to meeting number 40 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security. We will start by acknowledging that we are meeting on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin people. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of November 25th, 2021. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. The meeting is public. So pursuant to Standing Order 106 sub 4, the committee is commencing consideration of the request by 5 members of the committee to undertake a study of developments regarding the allegations of political interference in the Nova Scotia mass murder investigation. I will now open the floor to debate. Ms. Dancho.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just going to formally move the motion that pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee meet for one meeting on Thursday, October 27th in relation to the public release of the recording of RCMP Commissioner Lucky's call to the Nova Scotia RCMP and the allegations of political interference in the 2020 Nova Scotia mass murder investigation, and that the RCMP Commissioner appear in the first hour, that Minister Blair be invited to appear in the second hour, and that the previously scheduled witnesses for C21 be added to an additional meeting for the C21 study.
Thank you. The motion is in order, and the motion is on the floor. Any debate? Ms. Demoff.
Thank you, Chair. I've read the transcripts over. I see absolutely nothing in here that changes what we already heard in 2 hours of testimony with Minister Blair and Commissioner Lucky. I want to thank you, Chair, for finding the time for us to meet today so that we didn't have to lose a meeting on our study of Bill C-21. But in theory, this motion that was brought forward could have had us lose 2 meetings on Bill C-21, which quite frankly, from this side of the House, is a priority for us. Getting Bill C-21 passed, getting the hearing from witnesses who are making the time to come and talk to us about Bill C-21. So it is a priority. So, Chair, thank you for doing this. And I notice in the motion that was brought forward, it says that an additional meeting be added, but I mean, given House resources, there's never any guarantee of additional meetings. So I would think a written explanation from the Commissioner would suffice, but if not, I would like to amend the motion, Chair, and I'll officially do this, that we amend the motion that where it says that the committee meet for one meeting on Thursday, October 27th, that it may be amended to say that the committee meet following consideration of Bill C-21.
Thank you. The amendment is in order, and debate on the amendment. So we had Mr. Ellis after Mr. Moff. So did you want to go ahead?
Go ahead.
So,
who's that?
Mr. Ellis, please go ahead.
Well, thank you, Chair. Certainly this is shocking. It's shocking in the sense, Chair, that you have to really repress the disbelief and dismay, Chair, with which I hear members opposite speaking about this. This is a point where we understand very clearly that there was interference from a political level in an active police investigation in my riding, Chair, in which 23 people died. I can't underscore that enough, Chair. If this committee refuses to find time to revisit this issue when it's related to a political interference and also an RCMP commissioner, of course, at the very highest of the high levels of the RCMP, how can anybody have faith in the process of government in Canada? This is absolutely ludicrous and, as I said, shocking from the perspective of the people that I represent. And it's quite a slap in the face, I would suggest.
Are we not debating the amendment, or are we debating the main motion?
We are
Just
debating
want
the
a
amendment,
clarification.
and I hope Mr. Ellis will get to that point.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And once again, I find it shocking that I get interrupted, that we need to underscore the importance of the ridiculous nature of this amendment that's proposed here, Mr. Chair. People died, and then a government to use this for political gain is absolutely shocking, and this committee not wanting to undertake any type of action to remediate the situation, which has clearly changed, when now we know very clearly, Mr. Chair, that Mr. Campbell's notes pointed out what Commissioner Lucky said and what Minister Blair said. Now we have a transcript of a meeting which also corroborates that. And we have other testimony at the Mass Casualty Commission, Mr. Chair, which corroborates all three of these things going together to have an understanding of exactly what happened. We have an unbelievably clear picture here, Mr. Chair, and for this committee not to want to undertake having those members back again, is shocking. It's a slap in the face. It's a disservice. It's an apolitical move towards the people in my riding, and quite frankly, Mr. Chair, it's an affront to democracy. So I can't understand how anybody could sit here and not want to understand very clearly, when new evidence has come forward, exactly what is happening here. And once again, I can't understand this at all, Mr. Chair, and this type of amendment to a very simple motion to have the major players return to a committee that has tried to understand this unbelievable political interference for many meetings now, certainly in my mind not enough to assuage the concerns which are happening in the riding of Cumberland-Colchester. And when you look at that, you know what? People from Nova Scotia, Mr. Chair, they don't want excuses anymore. They want answers. And they're not getting answers from the Mass Casualty Commission. And another, again, affront to their goodwill and solitude is this committee that, again, does not want to provide them any answers to what happened at a political level. And I just can't understand how anybody on the opposite side could want to vote against this. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Ellis. We go to Ms. Dancho, then Ms. Perkins, then Madame Michaud.
No, Mr. Chair, I'm fine. You can go to the NDP.
Okay,
Thank you.
Mr. Perkins, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I echo, as a fellow Nova Scotian, Mr. Ellis's comments, but I would point to the amendment to the main motion, which is delaying the examination of this new evidence that was only released last Friday and given to the Mass Casualty Commission after the Mass Casualty Commission has finished its public hearing process. So I think it's incumbent upon this committee to delve into the details of the clear contradictions and lies between what has been said in committee, what has been said in the House, and what has been said between witnesses at the Mass Casualty Commission. Mass Casualty Commission is on an urgent agenda to finish their report, but they don't have the ability to re-examine these witnesses at this time because of the mandate and the way the mandate was structured by the federal government. So I would encourage all members to vote against the amendment and vote for the main motion so that we can get to this urgent study. What could be more urgent? And I understand that C-21 is urgent to a number of people, but I think the mass murder of 22 Nova Scotians is of utmost importance for this committee and paramount importance to be studied. And the study of C-21 can wait another meeting or two while we delve into these clear contradictions by the minister and the commissioner. Thank you.
Thank you. Madame Michaud, and then Mr. McGregor. Madame Michaud.
Merci, Monsieur. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it's an extremely important meeting that needs to take place. I agree with my colleagues from the Conservative Party. But like the Liberal Party members, I am concerned we might delay the study of Bill C-21. Perhaps you can answer my question, Mr. Chair or Mr. Clerk. Perhaps there's a way to have a meeting outside of our regular committee hours to hold that meeting, just like we're doing today. This is not a usual time frame for us to meet as a committee anyways. So would it be possible to do that without using up any of our time?
I'll answer that. It is extraordinarily difficult to find extra time. We only got this meeting today because Foreign Affairs canceled, and we heard through the grapevine that it was available. We have been trying for a number of weeks to get the coming to Thursday extended by an hour. That has been declined. It's very, very difficult to get any extra time in a schedule. So I hope that answers the question. You still have the floor if you're not finished.
Ben, j'ajouterais peut-être.
I would add that in this case, I find that tough. You know, it's unfortunate to postpone this because I feel studying Bill C-21 will take a while to study. There are a number of issues we have to look at. I'm sure that clause by clause will also be the subject of discussions. I agree that this is urgent, somewhat urgent. It really is. The time is of the essence. It's now, you know, that it would be ideal for us to get these transcripts of these discussions with Brenda Lucki. It would be unfortunate to come back to this in 2-3 months. But at the same time, it might be good to have the assurance from the Conservative Party that it would be one meeting and that it wouldn't be something else added on to postpone. And I know it's in good faith. I know they don't want to delay C-21. But if there are constantly new urgent things to deal with, it's possible that bill that to me seems like a priority could be postponed. I would be open to having a meeting shortly, but only one.
Thank you. Mr. McGregor, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, with respect to C-21, I mean, I have an interest also in getting on with it, but by my count, we still have 5 meetings of witnesses remaining for C-21. We agreed to 8 total, and we've done 3. So if we were to continue the current schedule, that would take us to the week following Remembrance Day, the constituency week that we have. I think the Conservatives acted with their original motion in good faith by adding that last line so that, you know, and I understand it's not always easy to find an additional meeting, but we did manage to find an additional meeting today. In the interest of not delaying C-21, I could be open to trying to find some time during the constituency week, if that helps. But I think we should keep it open. So the only thing that concerns me, Mr. Chair, is that naming October 27th, I know that the minister and the commissioner, by virtue of their positions, are pretty busy people. So are we shoehorning ourselves by naming a specific date if they're not available? I am interested in seeing them come as soon as possible, but we do have to work with 2 very busy people's schedules. So I think with respect to the amendment, I'm not sure I'm totally in favor of it yet. I do think we can find a way to accommodate both the bill and the timeliness of this particular issue that's before us.
Thank you, Ms. Demoff, followed by Ms. Dancho. Okay, well, sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate the comments from all parties. What I would say about the additional meeting, I appreciate the mention from my colleague from the NDP. We did, in good faith, want to make efforts with this motion not to delay C-21. We recognize that that is a keen priority for other parties in particular, and for us, parts of the bill certainly. And so that's why we added that in. And my understanding is actually the Liberal Whip's office was looking to add additional meetings for C-21 anyway. So I believe that they're very familiar with the committee schedule, so I'm just surprised that now it seems that we're not able to find time. I'm very confident, in fact, that we can find time to have an additional meeting to fit in C-21 on schedule should we need to. In terms of the timing for the minister and the commissioner, I will say that we don't normally ask for ministers to resign or for the commissioner of the RCMP to resign, but it's very clear based on the audio recording and what was said in committee that someone is not telling the truth, and that would be either the head of our RCMP or the minister, the former Minister of Public Safety. That is very significant, Mr. Chair. I would be pretty shocked if the minister was not willing to make time in his schedule to come defend himself. The same for the RCMP. In fact, I'd be very, very shocked and surprised. I think that they owe it to Canadians to come explain themselves. We have conflicting testimony from those involved. And again, these are powerful people who appears to have very much misled the Standing Committee of Public Safety and National Security. So I would assume that they would put everything aside to come defend themselves as they have in their statements, but again, they need to be held accountable by this committee on behalf of Canadians. So I am very confident that they will make time in their schedule as per the motion, unless they are something medical or they're out of the country. But even then, we have Zoom capabilities. If they are out of the city, they can still Zoom in. So pending some life-threatening situation, I would assume that they would want to come defend themselves and answer our questions, Mr. Chair. So it's our expectation that this motion passes, that they will honor this motion and that they will come explain themselves to this committee. Lastly, I would say again, I'm completely open to meeting during the break week. Again, we are not looking to delay this bill. That is our intention. I remain committed to that. And so I very much appreciate working together with the opposition parties to hold this government accountable, as is our duty to Canadians. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I would just, for information, it wasn't the Liberal whip that was looking for time. It was me. I was trying to find more time to move things forward. Pardon me?
No, you got promoted.
There you go. I'm not sure that's a promotion. So Ms. DeMoss, followed by Mr. McGregor.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I don't think we can assume that there's going to be extra time available to us, and just I think everyone seems to be agreeable to doing it during the break week, provided this won't.
The C21 meeting during the break week.
So. Should we have cross conversation here, Chair, or what should we be doing?
No, we
here?
shouldn't. I guess we should direct the meeting, and I'll try and sort things out.
So I think there's agreement to have an additional meeting during the break week. I think we've got a schedule for this week, and with all due respect to my Conservatives colleagues and to Mr. Ellis for saying that we have refused to deal with this, both Minister Blair and the Commissioner have appeared at the committee on this exact issue, and the Commissioner of the RCMP issued a statement yesterday about the recording, which is only a partial recording, I would add, but issued to say that nothing has changed in her statement. So to say that no one has been accountable, they have both appeared before this committee in the past. So they have been here. We did make time for them to come. And I've read the transcript. I think, quite frankly, Commissioner is very frustrated with the local RCMP, the lack of communication from the local RCMP during this horrific massacre that occurred. She's frustrated by the way that they were dealing with communications from Nova Scotia, and so, you know, that's obvious. But on the date, Chair, I have suggested following C21, so I guess we should maybe, if you want to vote on that and someone wants to put in an alternate date, then I would be open to that, Chair.
Thank you. So we go to Mr. McGregor, followed by Ms. Dancho, followed by Mr. Motz. Mr. Motz, okay. So Mr. McGregor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I'm not sure I can support the amendment, and I would have a suggestion for alternative wording after a vote. But I mean, with respect to my Liberal colleagues, like, you know, these are pretty damning quotes. You know, when it says, quote, "It was a request that I got from the minister's office," end quote. And then later on, when the commissioner is talking about what's going on in the world of handguns, the fact they're trying to get legislation going, that this legislation is actually to help police. I mean, my ultimate goal with this is not just to focus on the problem. I think we also need to look at solutions. And I think part of the problem is the fact that our Royal Canadian Mounted Police Act, Section 5.1, is far too vague and open to interpretation. Like Mr. Chair, it just reads, you know, that there should be a commissioner of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police to hold office during pleasure, who, under the direction of the minister, has control and management of the force. So, under the direction of the minister, what direction is that? That's very open to interpretation. I think it is going to continually bring us back to this problem. There are jurisdictions, provincial jurisdictions in Canada, there are jurisdictions around the world which have attached far greater specificity in their police acts to what powers the minister has and what powers a police commissioner has, and those two shall never cross. So I hope that through this conversation that we not only get clarification from the minister and the commissioner, and I think they do need to come as quickly as possible, but I also think we as a committee have a duty to Canadians to explore how do we prevent this from happening in the future, because that, if we don't explore that question, that will be a dereliction of our duty to Canadians. We not only want to get to the bottom of this and find the truth, but we also have to be solution-oriented. So I'll leave it at that, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. McGregor. Mr. Motz, please.
Thank you, Chair. I move we cease debate on the amendment, please, and adjourn debate on the amendment, please.
You move to adjourn debate? I think you can only move to adjourn debate,
Oh, you can move to adjourn debate on an amendment.
because the debate will carry on until, as long as anybody has to speak. You can,
No, you can adjourn debate.
you can, and what that would do to us, that would, that would,
Chair.
if there are no more speakers on the amendment,
Est-ce qu'on peut juste répéter l'amendement?
Can we just repeat the amendment before we vote on it?
go ahead.
Thanks. And rather than adjourning, I think we should just vote that down and then look at doing something on a break week. And Alistair, you said you had wording for that. So the amendment was to remove Thursday, October 27th and replace it with following consideration of Bill C-21.
Is there any more discussion on the amendment? Then let's go to a vote. All in favor?
The amendment?
Of the amendment. We're voting on the amendment. The amendment is to schedule the meeting, to change the motion that the date is following the, the consideration. Yes. So all in favor of the amendment? All opposed? I think it's defeated. Mr. McGregor.
Okay, so I will move an amendment to the main motion, and it's a simple one. So after the words Thursday, October 27th, I would just simply insert "or as soon as possible," just to give a little bit of leeway. I understand schedules can be a bit demanding, but we do want them as soon as possible.
Is there debate on Mr. McGregor's amendment? Ms. Dancho?
I do appreciate the amendment. I just, again, want to reiterate that I think it provides the minister and the commissioner an out. They could not be available till after Christmas, for example, and we don't have an accountability mechanism for that. So I just want to make that very clear, that I think this provides an out for those who we're trying to hold accountable. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any, Mr. Motz?
Is it possible, Mr. McAllister, that rather than as soon as possible, we put an end date on the as soon as possible? And that would be sometime certainly before we have to break, so before the end of next week. Is that right?
I think that's a sub-amendment. Can we do a sub-amendment?
But not if he chooses to include that in his
Okay,
motion.
so that's a sub-amendment, I guess. There's
Or is it a friendly amendment?
There's strictly no such thing as a friendly amendment, but
Well, maybe
if
not in this committee.
if Mr. McGregor agrees to that amendment, if you restate it, we'll pretend that that's how you moved it. So,
So mine was the amendment. I'll let Mr. Motz read out how he will amend my amendment. So if he wants to, because he's got the wording.
go ahead.
3rd of November. I would say, Mr. Chair, that is a sub-amendment, sub-amendment to the motion or the amendment by Mr. McAllister, that rather than as soon as possible. Did I say
McGregor.
McAllister? Sorry,
McGregor.
McGregor. Sorry. We don't know who McAllister is, but
Yeah.
that as soon as possible be deleted and put in by November 1st.
Okay, so on the sub-amendment, Ms. DeMoff, please.
So I'm a little bit confused. It's on Thursday, October 27th, or before?
Or as soon as possible before November 1st.
Before November,
That's a week from tomorrow.
before November 1st, you said, Glenn?
By November 1st. That's next Tuesday
That provides Friday, Monday, Tuesday.
and Wednesday and Thursday this.
Oh, yeah, this week, but just gives a couple extra days.
So could we, sorry to do this, but could we amend that just before November 10th?
We can't go
weeks
too,
from now.
any further down the amendment
Okay,
rabbit hole. We also we're limited to our regular meeting slots, right? So we've got next Tuesday, we've got Thursday, we've got Tuesday, we've got Thursday again, right? And the clerk is checking into possible availability during the break week, but that's what we've got right now.
If I could adjust that, my sub-amendment to say, actually to give more flexibility to the 3rd, by the 3rd of, that gives us 10 days from now to have it completed. So that gives us 3 more meetings after tomorrow. So that's 4 meetings away. We have 4 meeting options.
Okay, so your sub-amendment is that, to Mr. McGregor's amendment that it occur on or after this Thursday.
On or before
But on or before, such that it's before
November 3.
November 3rd.
Yeah, or on or before
December
November
3rd.
3.
November 3rd. Okay, we're playing a little bit fast and loose with procedure here, but I think we can work with that. Madame Michaud.
Je pense pas que je peux proposer un autre.
I don't think I can put forward a new sub-amendment to that, but perhaps Mr. Moss would agree to extending that to the 10th rather than the 3rd of November, which would give the clerk the riding week as well. I don't generally like to sit during those riding weeks because we have work to do in our respective ridings. Perhaps the minister or the commissioner may not be available, or there might not be a time slot for that meeting. Perhaps during the riding week, that might be an option. So I'm not sure if he's open to changing his sub-amendment, but if not, I would possibly be voting against the sub-amendment to then propose a sub-amendment that would extend to the 10th.
Okay, so Mr. Motz,
No, I think, having the motion read to the 3rd of November gives us 4 full meetings.
okay, fair enough. So is there any further discussion on, are we clear about this amendment? Sub-amendment, sorry.
Mr. Chair, if you could clarify what we are voting on, please.
Okay, Mr. McGregor made a motion to amend the date to be on the 27th or as soon as possible afterwards. And Mr. Motz has modified that such that it occur on or before the 3rd of November. Fair enough? Okay.
Mr. Chair, just to be clear, that extends the original motion by an entire week of availability. So now we're looking at 10 days of leeway for the commissioner and the minister to come to committee, which is considerable compared to the original motion.
Thank you, Ms. DeMott.
thanks, Chair. So we wouldn't support what's on the floor, but we would support a change that Christina proposed to November 10th.
Okay, so if this, anyway, okay, fair enough. So we have to have a vote on this sub-amendment. So is there any further discussion on this sub-amendment?
I raised my hand, Mr. Chair.
Sorry, go ahead, Mr. Van Bynen.
Thank you. The intent here was to utilize free time, and that is why I would support extending the before November the 10th amendment. I think it's important, but I think both C-21 and this investigation is important, and it's worth the commitment of our time during the riding week.
Thank you, Mr. Van Bynen. That is a possible future sub-amendment. However, the amendment right now is to extend, according to Mr. McGregor, as modified further by Mr. Mott. So the sub-amendment of Mr. Mott is what we are now voting on. So are we ready to vote on this? All in favor of Mr. Mott's sub-amendment? All opposed? it fails, right? Okay, so we're now back to Mr. McGregor's amendment, which is to have the motion, sorry, have the meeting on the 27th or as soon as possible, as afterwards as possible. Is there any further discussion on that or any further amendments? Ms. Michaud, Madame Michaud.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would propose a sub-amendment to Mr. McGregor's sub-amendment. So following Thursday, October 27th, or as soon as possible, before November 10th, 2022.
Okay. Ms. DeMoff.
Can we just say on or before November 10th?
Le ou avant.
Ms. Dancho.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I understand we're trying to provide a little bit more leeway to the minister and the RCMP commissioner. As we've said, we provided in good faith an additional week that was voted down. Now we're looking at 2 additional weeks, but I will point out that during break weeks, the media is not paying us close enough attention, so it really is very convenient for the minister and the commissioner if they do come to committee during break week when eyes will not be as on them as well as much as they would otherwise. So I just wanted to point that out to committee members. I think this is important. This is a public interest story. This is about a minister possibly lying on the record and an RCMP commissioner. So I think it's important that we have folks that are in Ottawa during a sitting week when the ministers aren't zooming in from their living rooms and their home ridings. The minister is here this week, and I think it would be appropriate to have it now, but I just wanted to put that on the record for this motion, sub-amendment.
Thank you. We have Ms. Michaud, Madame Michaud, and following Mr. And then Mr. Ellis. Madame Michaud.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to be clear, it's not really to give them an out, neither the minister nor Ms. Lucky. Really, it's out of respect for the administration of the House. There are a number of committees that can get cancelled because perhaps the situation for interpreters is not ideal. There was a recent incident at the Senate that occurred. It is difficult to find available time slots, so it's a consideration for the employees of the House, employees of the administration. Everyone has to work to set up a new time slot. So sometimes people have to find new time slots and perhaps people may be overworked. It's to give them a bit more time. Really, it's not about the minister and the commissioner.
Okay, thank you. And sometimes we get lucky like we did today. Mr. Ellis, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And, I'll respectfully disagree with my colleague from the bloc. This is not about the House resources. It's not about Minister Blair in the sense of his time. It's not about Commissioner Lucky in the sense of her time. This is about the understanding, as I mentioned previously, for 22 people and an unborn child who died. It's as simple as that. Those who affected this investigation, of which the people in Nova Scotia have entirely lost faith in the process, need to have answers, Mr. Chair. And I think it's a travesty to think that we need to make time for House resources. That may be a reality, I understand that. But for us to sit here in this committee and not attempt to put our best foot forward, that's not good enough. It is not good enough. This committee needs to do better. There's new evidence here. It is exceedingly clear that Commissioner Lucky and Minister Blair have conflicting stories. And to sit here and to say that we need to be pandering to this or that or trying to smooth things over, it's not good enough. That is not good enough. Is that why we came here? Do we come here to say, oh, we're too busy, or oh, the minister's too busy? That makes no sense to me. That's nonsensical. People are too busy to come here to answer for mistruths or half-truths or misleading or whatever parliamentary word I'm going to use today because I'm going to maintain a measured approach. That is unacceptable. It's ridiculous. It's nonsense. This is beyond any common sense. You know, people looking at these transcripts now and saying, oh, that's not what the commissioner said. Well, let's get the dang commissioner in here and make her understand then what she said. Let's get the minister in here, Mr. Chair. Let's get them both in here. Then we don't have to be over here going along. No, let me finish. This is my time.
Stop.
And you know
Stop.
what? This is inappropriate.
Stop. Could you keep your voice down for this on the behalf
Very
of
good.
the
A very good
interpreters,
point,
right?
Chair, and I respect that. But this is an emotional thing for me, Mr. Chair, and the people in this committee need to understand that. They need to understand very clearly that we can no longer allow people to go on, such as my colleagues across the aisle, and say, this is what I think the commissioner said, or this is what I think the minister said. That's not right. Let's get them in here. Let's have them go through the transcripts themselves. Let's have them understand what was said at the MCC. Let's have them understand what Darren Campbell said. Let's have them understand what Deputy Commissioner Leather was told not to talk about by the Justice Minister lawyers. Let's have them in here and let's make them atone for what they have said. As simple as that.
Thank you. That's the subject of the main motion. Any further discussion on the sub-amendment?
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Van Bynen, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to clarify Ms. Dancho's comments that the concern about extending it to November 10th was not enough media. Did I hear that correctly?
Mr. Van Bynen, I think you're well aware that ministers go home for break week. I think it's important that they come to committee in person. They are here this week. They should be here in person as well. The public wants to have answers on this. And I think you're well aware of what break week means. So I don't think I need to further clarify my comments to you, Mr. Van Bynen.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion on the sub-amendment by Madame Michaud? Seeing none, let's have a vote. All in favor of the sub-amendment, of Madame Michaud's sub-amendment, raise your hands, please. I see that as a yes. All opposed? The sub-amendment carries. So we now return to Mr. McGregor's motion as modified by Ms. Michaud, Madame Michaud. Is there any further discussion on Mr. McGregor's motion as modified by Madame Michaud? Seeing none, let's have a vote on that. All in favor?
What are we voting on? And
Okay.
give us the wording for it, please.
This is a test, right? So Mr. McGregor voted that we modify the main motion to be October 27th or as soon as possible thereafter. Madame Michaud added the text subject that it occur on or before the 10th of November. Is that correct? And that is the motion we now, that is the amendment we are now voting on. So is there any further discussion? Mr. Van Bynen, go ahead.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. I wonder if we might have the vote called out for members. It's difficult for me to see how the votes are going, largely because the screen displays only the speaker.
Fair enough. If we're ready to vote, I'll ask the clerk to conduct a poll, to poll the vote, please.
So, Ms. Damoff.
Yes.
Mr. Chan. Yes. Mr. Noor Mohammed.
Yep.
Mr. Shifke. Mr. Van Bynen.
Yes.
Ms. Dancho.
Yes.
Mr. Mutz.
Yes.
Mr. Shipley.
Yes.
I thought Perkins and him were voting.
Oh, yes. My apologies. Mr. Ellis.
Yes.
Mr. Perkins.
Yes.
Madame Michaud.
Excusez, en faveur.
Mr. McGregor.
Yes.
The motion or the amendment is carried. So we now go back to the main motion as amended by Mr. McGregor and further amended by Madame Michaud. Is there any further discussion on the main motion? Ms. DeMott, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. And, you know, I think every single member in the House of Commons, every single Canadian was devastated by what happened in Nova Scotia. And to imply that that we weren't is and in the way it was done is I actually find quite offensive. I think every single Canadian was absolutely shocked and heartbroken. And you know, the reason the inquiry was called was get to the bottom of why things happened the way that they did. During that time, we had Commissioner Lucky here. We had Minister Blair here. There's been a recording, a partial recording of a phone conversation that had. It's not all there. There's been one line that's been quoted extensively, but, you know, there's a number of other quotes. Even the reference that Mr. McGregor made to about, you know, legislation is coming. Well, you know, that wasn't a secret. That was in our platform. That was discussed regularly. So there was nothing confidential about the fact that legislation was coming forward. Both Commissioner Lucky and Minister Blair have been very clear, most recently Minister Blair in the House, saying that he did not direct the Commissioner. To start implying that by not supporting this motion, we're not supporting the people of Nova Scotia and the families and friends and loved ones of those who've died is just simply not true. We have heard from those. We have heard during the inquiry. So, you know, Mr. Chair, it's unfortunate to hear comments like the media won't be here on a break week, because I mean, either we want to get to answers or we want to have a meeting so that the media is here. That's also is disappointing. So I'm not going to support the motion. I think we've heard enough. I don't think anything has changed from when we had the Commissioner and the Minister here previously. And, you know, as I went through the transcript, you know, Commissioner Lucky is the Commissioner of the RCMP, and she has every right to expect that the people who work for her should be respectful. And I time and time again through this, she was upset with timelines. She was upset with the way that the media was being handled in many ways. She couldn't get a chronology of what had happened. She couldn't get a map for days, and had offered assistance to Nova Scotia, and it didn't come forward. So I don't think there's anything new from this transcript, and so won't be supporting to bring them back. I also, sorry, Chair, I also appreciate, however, the addition of an extra meeting, because C21 has to be a priority, and it has to remain a priority for our committee. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We have Ms. Stancho, followed by Mr. Ellis, followed by Mr. Nur Mohammed. So, Ms. Stancho.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it's very clear that Conservative members and our colleague represents the area where 22 people and a pregnant woman were killed. So I think that it's very obvious why our emotions are very high about this. The idea that the Minister of Public Safety at the time saw the death of 22 people, including a pregnant woman, as an opportunity to get his legislation passed is disgusting. The fact that he came here and misled the committee on the record, what he said directly contradicts what Commissioner Lucky said during the summer, let alone now that we have an audio recording of the actual meeting. He fully denied knowing that the commissioner was going to go against her own advice to jeopardize an investigation and try to get information released. He said he didn't know anything about that on the record in committee. He also denied asking her to do that. And yet in the audio recording, it says that she says that his office requested that she do that, and then she confirmed to the minister that she would. To me, that is very clear, and there's no way that you can see that otherwise. Either she's lying or he's lying, or perhaps they're both lying, which is that is why we've asked them both to resign. You can't get more cut and dry than how contradictory that is, Mr. Chair. And this was during a time that funerals hadn't even been had. And we may have a minister here that was looking at that as an opportunity. The commissioner tied this to Liberal policy. That was why she was going against her own advice to push for information to be released that she just days before said in writing to the minister's chief of staff, the national security advisor, do not release this beyond the minister and the prime minister because it could jeopardize the investigation. She said that in writing. Only days later, she was reprimanding her deputies for not sharing that information because she had committed to the minister that she would, who denied that he ever asked her to do that. So it is very clear that there was ruthless political posturing being done during this time, going against expert advice, looking to jeopardize, knowingly jeopardizing an investigation for political gain. So I think that is why our emotions are running very high. It's deeply upsetting, and the minister must be held accountable, as should the commissioner. And the public has every right to be fully aware of that. And it isn't right that there's any move to downplay this or push it off for months or push it during a week when people aren't paying attention or can zoom in from their home. It is very important that we host this, and I would call on the minister, if he truly means what his statement to the media said, then he should have no problem coming to committee this week, and he should bring the commissioner with him, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ellis, followed by Mr. Nur Mohammed. Mr. Ellis, go ahead.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll start off by apologizing to the translators. As Ms. Dancho correctly points out, this is an exceedingly emotional time, and again, I do apologize for speaking loudly. And not with the emotion, but for the loudness. Absolutely. That being said, Mr. Chair, I find it absolutely appalling that we're going to sit here in this committee today and talk about the he said, she said of all of this, when we could actually solve this issue. We can talk about Ms. Damoff thinks that somebody said this, or Ms. Dancho said somebody said this, or I think somebody said this, or heaven forbid, Mr. Chair, you think somebody said this. We can have them here. There's a simple solution. They can come in front of this committee, and they can explain themselves. It's as simple as that. And I call on my colleagues across the aisle. I understand some have experience in the police force. I call on them to understand that the importance of not hearing what they wrote in a public statement or what they said to the media, or even reading the transcripts. Let's have them here and understand. We all know. I was a family doctor for 26 years. Do we have people write in their concerns to me? No. What do? We sit down in front of people. We actually sit with them and we talk to them. My good colleague here was a police officer for many years. What do? They interview people. They don't have them write their statements and think, well, wonder what he meant there. My good colleague across the aisle, another former police officer, same thing, Mr. Chair. They actually have people sit in front of them. They don't get to hide. You don't get to say whatever you want to the media and go on and on and on. When new evidence comes, you re-interview people. It's as simple as that, Mr. Chair. And for my colleagues across the aisle to scoff at the idea that we don't have the time in Parliament to help atone for the misery that 22 lives were taken in an unborn baby, that we don't have the time to do that, that's unconscionable. There's no other word for it. It's unconscionable. And it behooves us as parliamentarians. That's why we're here. I can't even believe that we have to have a debate about this, that my colleagues across the aisle suggest that they're going to vote down having these two witnesses back again. Am I living in an altered universe that we don't have time for these families? I'm beyond words, Mr. Chair. I have no other words other than to implore my colleagues that they need to have due process here, have these witnesses back, and have them questioned once again for what they've said, what the transcripts show, what others have said. Have them have their say. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Ellis. Mr. Nur Mohammed, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've been sitting here listening quietly, and I want to begin what I'm going to say to Mr. Ellis. And, I can't imagine what he and his fellow Nova Scotians have been going through over the course of the last little while. And all I want to say is, you have our sympathies and you have our support in making sure that those families get the justice that they deserve. I had the privilege as a young bureaucrat of working with Liberal and Conservative governments dealing with victims of terrorism and victims of crime. And one thing that was very important at that time was not to politicize tragedy. And I have to admit, I was almost there in terms of supporting this motion, because I do believe it's important to hear the truth. And I'm sorry that Mr. Ellis has to leave, because I think this is an important point that I'd have liked for him to hear. But, you know, I think it lays bare the point that I want to make, that when comments are made like the cameras aren't going to be on this, it tells you what the agenda is. And that is of concern to me. If the agenda is the truth and the agenda is let's make sure we have the conversation, then it shouldn't matter whether it's a break week or not. It shouldn't matter whether or not the lights of the cameras are shining on it. If the media are concerned about this and it's a real story, the media will find their way to it. And unfortunately, what we have here is people playing politics. And so if that is the case, I cannot see myself supporting this motion, because it is ultimately, I don't think, in the interest of the country to waste time by bringing the minister of the commissioner of the RCMP to rehash exactly what we already know. There is nothing new in that transcript. There is nothing new. And for us to waste the time of Parliament in trying to create space for political opportunism is not okay. That's not what Canadians have asked us to do. What they have asked us to do is to get C-21 done and to stop wasting time and to stop trying to throw roadblocks in terms of passing a piece of legislation that will present future tragedy.
Thank you, Mr. Nur Mohammed. Is there any further discussion on Madame Dancho's motion as amended? No further discussion? Ms. Dancho, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, we may have discussion amongst the opposition parties, given the importance of this, that we'd like to move a sub-amendment to have this by next Thursday would be the deadline, not the 10th, but the, sorry, what date is that? I'm sorry, the 3rd? The 3rd. If we have agreement on that, I will move it. I'm moving a sub-amendment that the latest date would be the 3rd. It's now the 10th, moving it, my sub-amendment would mean it's by the 3rd.
We already voted on that sub-amendment and we defeated it.
No, it was amended.
Mr. McGregor made an amendment. Mr. Motz moved for the 3rd.
Okay. Then I will say by the 4th then, Mr. Chair.
By the 4th.
And my sub-amendment is by the 4th.
It's a distinction without a difference, really. Mr. McGregor, please.
Yeah, no, I understand your position, Chair. You have to look after procedure, but I'm sure if you test the room, you're going to see a majority of members in favor of what's being proposed.
Well, let's do this. So we have dealt with this issue. We can deal it again if we have unanimous consent to do so. Do we have unanimous consent to consider? It's a sub-amendment that's already been dealt with, right?
Or a new amendment, pardon me. Yeah. That's new.
Sorry?
The 4th is a new amendment.
Mr. Clerk, is that not brand new because it's a new day?
It's not really a new amendment because we can't meet on the 4th, right? We have only specified days, so you can,
We don't know if we can meet next week. You're willing to do it to the 10th.
Well, there's more chance there. All I'm saying is, Mr. Motz made the sub-amendment. We voted on it. We voted it down. It's problematic for me to re-engage that. I mean, there has been more discussion. I think that's a fair point. If the room wants to vote on, do we have agreement to consider this motion? I don't think we can do this without unanimous consent. Having said that, I'm certainly willing to do my best with the clerk to arrange for this meeting as soon as possible. I mean, I guess one of the points of the whole discussion is finding a time that's going to work for the committee, finding a slot. We know it's extremely difficult to find slots for committee work. So,
Mr. Chair. I'm sorry. Why wouldn't we be able to meet on the 4th? That's a brand new day. That's not a holiday. It's a new day that we're proposing.
Sorry, what day is the 4th?
Friday.
So it's a brand new day, new amendment. There's been new discussion, as you pointed out rightfully.
I'm torn here. Mr. McGregor, go ahead.
Yeah, I think like Ms. Dancho's reasoning, you said we don't meet on Friday, we don't meet on Monday, but we're meeting today. So like by her logic, like she's just proposing a different day, and I think it's by the 4th.
We got lucky today. I should point that out again and again. Ms. Dancho. Mr. Moff, I apologize. I'm getting confused.
No, that's
I'll get
okay.
myself straightened out here just a minute.
That's okay. I guess I would ask if the opposition parties agree to having additional resources made available, particularly during the break week. No, we shouldn't call it break week because it's not a break. It's a constituency week. And I don't know about other people, but I'm just as busy during those weeks as I am when I'm in Ottawa. It's just a different kind of busy. But if everyone is in agreement for additional resources to be made available during that constituency week so that we can, if we're not dealing with the motion, if it passes, that we're dealing with C21 that week.
I'm not sure this gets me out of my dilemma here. Go ahead, Mr. Shipley.
Thank you, and I'm back in now because Mr. Ellis had to leave, so thank you. I think by the 4th is definitely a new amendment. It's a different date, different day. I don't know how we can say that's not a new amendment. And I think I have a lot of faith in our good chair and clerk here. And I think if you squeeze this one in here today, which kudos to you and doing a great job, that we could probably get something squeezed in and not have to take away from our C21 important work that we're doing, Ms. Damoff. None of us are trying to do that whatsoever. That's not in my mind. What we're trying to do is get this dealt with as soon as possible. And I'm hopefully that we can do both in the next 2 weeks. Keep working on our C21 and at the same time squeeze in another meeting as we're talking about to deal with this issue that's pressing and pertinent now.
Let me say that if we can arrange a meeting on that Friday, by the Friday.
That's 2 weeks.
So by the Friday, but not on the Friday?
Oh, by or on, by the end of that day.
If
By the end of
we
that
could
day.
arrange another meeting, I'm happy to do that, and that's within the scope of the amendment as we've already undertaken it. Quite happy to do that. We're working with the House Administration and what resources available. As I mentioned, for 2 weeks I've been trying to get some more time for C21 on Thursdays, and we got turned down, right? We only got this because Foreign Affairs canceled their meeting, and then they wanted it back, but we already had it, so they couldn't get it back. So House resources are extraordinarily tight. I think Mr. Shipley is Irish. I think he's got a bit of the Blarney there. He complimented the chair, and that's always good. Yeah. So I will accept that the 4th is a different date, and we can vote on that. I'm kind of reluctant. I think it's already encompassed with what we've already agreed to, but if we want to vote on that, let's vote on that sub-amendment. So are we clear on Mr. Shipley's sub-amendment? We are. Are we all clear on Mr. Shipley's sub-amendment? Mr. Nurmohamed, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can I just want to get clarification on something from Mr. Shipley? I just want to make sure that we are doing this and we are all committed to ensuring that we are not delaying C21 and that we're going to stick to the timelines to get C21 done as quickly as possible, right? I mean, if we have that, that's an important commitment personally for me to hear. And, you know, I trust my friend Mr. Shipley completely when he says that. So I just want to make sure that is the sense of the room before I said I'm going to vote.
Okay, so we have now the Mr. Shipley's.
Well, can I answer that then?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I have no intentions whatsoever delaying C21. I think we're a good enough working group here to get both done in the next 2 weeks. Plus, as my colleague just said, it's right in the motion that if we had to find extra time for 21, if we had to bounce that, we will. But not my intention at all, Mr.
So are we all now clear on Mr. Shipley's sub-amendment, which is to change the honor before, after the 27th, but honor before the 4th of November, correct? Instead of the 10th. Are we, okay, so I think we should probably call a roll on this vote as well. I'm sorry? Yeah.
So, Ms. Damov? Yes. Mr. Chen?
Yes.
Mr. Noor Mohammed? Mr. Noor Mohammed? He says yes. So, Monsieur Shifke?
Yes, I couldn't come off mute. Sorry. Yes.
Mr. Van Banen?
Yes.
Ms. Dancho?
Yes.
Mr. Mutz?
Yes.
Mr. Shipley?
Yes.
Mr. Perkins?
Yes.
Madame Michaud?
En faveur.
Mr. McGregor?
Okay, passes. Okay.
Chair?
Yes, go ahead.
Sorry, I have another amendment, Chair.
Yes?
At the end of the, sorry, I need my glasses. And the previously scheduled witnesses for C21 be added to an additional meeting for the C21 study, comma, including during the week of November 7th if necessary. So if we need to meet during the break week to add the meeting for C21, that we're going to commit to do it. So adding an additional meeting for the C21 study, including during the week of November 7th if necessary. So if you can't get an extra meeting, Chair, we're going to have to come in during the constituency week.
Okay. Are we clear on that sub-amendment, or on that amendment? I'm not sure where we're at, amendment, sub-amendment anymore. I think we're at an amendment now, so.
So I just want to clarify, just, we'd like to be, I believe we need to meet in person, and for me to get back and forth, as long as we have it that week, and it's not on the 10th, because I can't get back to deal with my veterans' issues in my riding unless I leave sometime during the early days of the 10th. So Monday to Thursday, or Monday to Wednesday is fine. Thursday, I can't make it back in time. So we leave that to the clerk. I'm
You
only
can
saying
get
that the
subs,
clerk.
Glenn. That's why you can get subs. I mean, it's up to the chair to see what, and work with the clerk.
Yes, and that's all
Right?
I'm saying. That's more for the clerk's attention.
Well, whenever the meetings are, I mean, all members have the option of attending in person or remotely, according to the House motion of whatever, right? So, if it's during the break week, probably I will be online, probably. It's a lot easier if we're all online than if part of us are online, but anyway. So, are we all clear with Ms. Damoff's amendment? So the motion as it stands is as Ms. Dancho presented it, modified by Mr. McGregor, modified by Ms. Dancho, or Ms. Michaud, modified Mr. Shipley, and now is being modified by Ms. Damoff to add that.
Including during the week of November 4th if necessary.
Okay. All right, so let's call a
Yep.
roll on that.
Mis-
Go ahead.
Just another point of order.
Yes?
Point of order, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure how the microphones are working there, but I'm not hearing the votes as they're being called out.
Okay, well, we'll ask people to shout them out.
Point of
Okay,
order, Chair, sorry, November
clerk will
7th. I
answer
think
that.
I said November 4th, including the week of November 7th if necessary.
Right, okay. Okay, please call the roll.
Ms. Damoff?
Yes.
Yes. Mr. Chan?
Yes.
Yes. Mr. Noor Mohammed?
Yes.
Yes. Mr. Van Bainen?
Yes.
Monsieur Shifke? Ms. Dancho?
Yes.
Yes. Mr. Mutz?
Yes.
Yes. Mr. Shipley?
Yes.
Yes. Mr. Perkins?
Yes.
Yes. Madame Michaud?
Oui.
Oui. Mr. McGregor?
Yes.
Yes. All in favor?
That's fairly convincing. Okay, so now we're back to the main motion as amended. So is there any further discussion on the, okay, so we're all clear what we're voting on now? Okay, then in that case, I will ask the clerk to call the roll, please.
Ms. Damoff?
No?
No. Mr. Chan?
Oh.
No. Mr. Noor Mohammed?
Nope.
Monsieur Chifke?
No.
No. Mr. Van Bynen?
No.
Ms. Dancho?
Yes.
Yes. Mr. Mutz?
Yes.
Yes. Mr. Shipley?
Yes.
Yes. Mr. Perkins?
Yes.
Madame Michaud?
Oui.
Oui. Mr. McGregor?
Yes.
Thank you. The motion passes. Mr. McGregor.
Thank you, Chair. I want to take this opportunity to move another motion which was given notice on Friday. The clerk is about to distribute it. This also has to deal with the subject of conflicting testimony that was given at this committee in March of this year versus what was given at the commission. So I'm going to read it out. The motion is as follows: that the chair, on behalf of the committee, contact the Ontario Provincial Police demanding an immediate response regarding their testimony before the committee on March 24th, 2022, where they identified possible security threats in relation to the Freedom Convoy, which runs in apparent contradiction to their testimony before the Public Order Emergency Commission on October 19th, 2022. And I won't take much time, Mr. Chair, but on March 24th, during my final 2.5 minutes, I asked Ottawa Chief of Police, Interim Chief of Police Bell, I said, quote, at the time, did you feel that it was a national security threat when you received those assessments? Did your police officers feel that that was a viable national security threat? Chief Bell referenced intelligence experts, and then he said he was going to defer the question to OPP Commissioner Thomas Carrique. OPP Commissioner Thomas Carrique answered, thank you, Chief Bell. Through you, Mr. Chair, we did identify it as a threat to national security through the Provincial Operations Intelligence Bureau on or about February 7th. He repeated that same answer in a reply to Mr. Samir Zuberi, who was a member of our committee at that time, and he did again reiterate that they identified it collectively as a risk to national security. Mr. Chair, if you contrast that with one of the Commissioner's deputies who on October 19th asserted that, that it was not a direct threat to national security. So I'm quite troubled that the very same police force is giving one answer to the Public Order Commission, but a completely different answer earlier the year to a committee of the House of Commons. And I think that through you, Mr. Chair, this committee has to empower you to seek clarification on why those two wildly different testimonies were given. So I will end there, and I hope I can gain support from my colleagues for this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McGregor. It seems to be in order. It is so moved. So is there any discussion on this motion? Seeing no discussion, I will let us have a vote on it. Do we need a roll call vote? I'd like to request a Okay, roll call vote. Go ahead.
Ms. Damoff? Yes. Yes. Mr. Chan?
Yes.
Mr. Noor Mohammed?
Yes.
Monsieur Chifke?
Oui.
Mr. Van Bynen?
Mr. Van Bynen?
Can't hear.
It's for voting. So, Mr. Van Bynen, your decision?
I'm voting yes.
Yes. Ms. Henshaw?
Oh, yes.
Mr. Mutz?
Yes.
Mr. Shipley?
Yes.
Yes. Mr. Perkins?
Oui.
Madame Michaud?
Oui.
Oui. Mr. McGregor?
Yes.
All in favor?
Carries, and I was counting on some amendments and sub-amendments.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Van Bynen, go ahead.
thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to reintroduce the motion I put forward on Thursday, October the 6th. Do you want me to read the motion again? Or it's a matter of record already and notice has been provided?
Well, I think it'd be best if you read it so we're all clear on what it is. So.
That pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee takes up a study to review emergency preparedness with respect to extreme weather hazards, including but not limited to floods, forest fires, ice, snowstorms, and hurricanes, and that the study include a review of critical infrastructure at high risk from these events, what all levels of governments are doing to mitigate these risks, and what response and recovery capacity is in place when disasters do occur, including a review of roles, responsibilities, and processes to activate response mechanisms. The study includes at least 4 meetings that the committee invite the President of the King's Privy Council and the Minister of Emergency Preparedness to appear and other witnesses as requested by the committee, and that this committee report its findings to the House, and that pursuant to Standing Order 109, the government table a comprehensive response thereto.
The motion is in order. I will note to the committee that there's no deadline or time specified for when to have it. So it would be something, if this passes, be something. We have a number of things on the table. We will have to try and juggle it as best we can. And if this passes, I would ask that all members submit witness lists so that we can ask our. Anyway, I'm trying not to speak to the motion, but anyway, any discussion?
Just briefly, that was part of my question, was there, I didn't catch if there was a date, but you're saying there's no specific date. So certainly if it passes, then it's up, it'll be happening. We just haven't decided when. Because my concern is earlier this fall, we talked about reviewing what happened, the mass killing in Saskatchewan. And I think that is still very present, and the investigation continues. But I think the committee agreed that was a pressing issue. There was a bit of disagreement on whether we would wait until the inquiry for that is over or not. But I just want to reiterate that certainly is the Conservative priority. And I know there are a few other parties who are also interested in studying it as soon as we conclude C21, or as soon as possible, given that I think we'd all like to prevent that from happening before, and I think it's the duty of our committee to ensure that it is the priority. But certainly this motion, I think it really actually originated in part from the former Conservative member for this committee, Teiko Van Papta, who's no longer on this committee, but a very hardworking member. So we are pleased with the motion overall.
Thank you. And I think we may have to have a subcommittee meeting down the road to sort out some of this stuff. So. Is there any further discussion on this motion? Mr. Nur Mohammed, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And, in the spirit of my fellow British Columbian, the Conservative member who had originally had this idea, I think it's a very important motion for us to get into. The one thing that I would suggest, if we are open to this during the course of the conversation about this, is to include some provision for travel. I think there's a lot we can learn from what has happened in Japan and in New Orleans, what has worked well, what has not worked well, so that we can see firsthand the long-term impacts of either good planning or poor planning. And, frankly, it may be too soon for us to travel to Atlantic Canada to see what has happened post-Fiona, but I do think it's important for us to learn lessons from other parts of the world to bring best practice to Canada where possible. I don't know how others feel about that, but I do think it may be worthy of consideration.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Nur Mohammed. Any further discussion? Seeing none, let us have a vote on this wonderful motion. Do we need a roll?
I think it's easier for Tony if we can.
I'm sorry?
I think Tony was having trouble hearing us, so maybe ask him if he wants a roll call or if we all agree.
If there's unanimous consent, I'm delighted with that, but I haven't heard. I haven't been able to hear the microphones very effectively. It might be all this Beatle music in the background.
Well, let us see if we have an agreement. Do we have agreement on this? I see agreement around the table, so I'll consider that a unanimous agreement. So thank you, Mr. Van Bynen.
Thank you.
Is there any further business for us at this time? Seeing none, thank you all for your time and for your diligence in pursuing matters of great passion and concern. And with that, we are now adjourned.